I was a deputy sheriff for 23 years. I started in 1957. I left for a couple of years, was an insurance adjuster. Most of my time was spent as a detective, either in the juvenile division or the detective division. For 8 years, I headed up the sex crime squad. I've investigated every type of crime imaginable except for treason. I assisted the homicide squad in trying to find Ted Bundy, serial murderers and serial rapists. But the case, the civil case, Hill versus Allred and the others, had to be the most important, the cream de cream, the frosting on the cake of my investigative career, because it so many different facets, the challenge that was involved there. We went, my partner and I, Rod, we went up to a point, and we had Paul Van Dam, the former county attorney and attorney general. I knew Paul on a first-name basis. I used to do special investigations for Paul when he was the county attorney, and that's before they had their own investigative staff. And I did special investigations for the attorney general before they had their own investigative staff. This is while I was there, and I was the internal investigator for Swede Larson, the sheriff there. So I've had a lot of experience in investigating. The psychological battle with these people was actually more important and set the stage for the legal battle. And if it hadn't have been for my involvement in polygamy and with AUB and my partners, we would not have been able to build this case. We went as far as we could on the investigation, and Paul was with a very prestigious law firm down in Salt Lake. And Virginia said that she didn't have enough money for a retainer. So we had to find somebody to do it on a contingency basis. Paul's law firm said this is going to be an expensive, convoluted lawsuit. They could see it. And unless she can come up with a retainer, we just don't want anything to do with it. So that left us without an attorney. So I wrote letters to the different law firms, the ambulance chasers, trying to induce them into taking it. I got a hold of old attorney friends that I knew, both county attorneys who were in private practice and defense attorneys that I was friends with, to see if any of them would be willing to take Virginia's case on a contingency basis. And a couple of the attorneys that I contacted had been involved with John Putman. And when I told them the story, they said, hey, I'd rather take their case than yours, unless you got a retainer. And so nobody really gave me much of a chance of bringing this to a successful conclusion. Well, it so happened that I was up to Ann Wild's house. She was the, well, you know who she is. She's one of the directors of Voices in Harmony and principal voices of pro-polygamy movement, which is another story. But while there, she introduced me to a guy named Tom Green. And I found out that Tom was a polygamist, but also a pedophile. But he had property out in Snake Valley next to the Granite Ranch. So I told him my story, and he says, hey, I'm the paralegal for an attorney by the name of Don Red up in Layton. And I will tell him about your story, and maybe I can get you an interview, and you can make a presentation. So he did arrange that, and Don Red agreed to take the case. Tom Green was to be the paralegal to help him, and I was to be the investigator. And my partner, Rod Williams, was to be the coordinator between Virginia and Don Red. And that way, Don and I worked together, and Tom Green. Well, come to find out, Tom Green gets indicted for bigamy, criminal non-support, and child rape. And I got to know him fairly well, and I told Tom, I said, Tom, you want to get rid of that child rape chart. That's not the monkey butt. No, he says, that'll be the easiest one to get rid of. I was up in Wyoming when she conceived, and she was only like 13 or 14 years old at the time. Tom subpoenaed me, and I testified in his behalf. I don't think I did him any good in his criminal non-support case. And then the county attorney, Job County attorney, subpoenaed me to testify in the child rape case. And he says, John, he says, if I subpoena you, will you claim journalist privilege? Because I had written one book and was considered a journalist and had written some articles for a weekly newspaper. So I was legitimately, I didn't feel like a journalist. I was a journalist. I said, hell no, I'll tell the truth and let the ball bounces where it is. And so he subpoenaed me, and I'm afraid my testimony did not help Tom Green. And he wound up going to prison for 5 years. He's out now. But Tom was somewhat like Cody Brown, only he had a lot of skeletons. And he thought that his story was so wonderful that he could write a book and he would make millions of dollars. And while he was in prison, his plural wives could go on speaking tours and get more money and this sort of thing. So while Tom was down in prison, I knew Jack Ford, who was a PR guy down at the prison, and he arranged for me to go down and meet Tom Green face to face. And Tom wanted me to do the prosecution side of the book because the lady that he had doing his side was on the outs with the prosecutor. And I said, Tom, I'll do it on one condition. This is what's that. And I says that I'm not going to whitewash anything, that I'm gonna tell the truth, and whatever comes out, whether it's good or bad. So if you got anything to hide, and I start digging into different things, you better call me off right now. And he said, well, I don't know what that can be. I got nothing to hide. And it wasn't the next day that the people in support of Tom Green started a assassination attack on me on the internet, accusing me of being a secret spy for the prosecution and all sorts of crazy things, which were absolutely untrue. And the one thing that these people don't want you to do is to tell the truth and to tell it as you see it. And of course, once I decided, hey, this whole system is all wrong. It's nothing but an illusion and deception after deception. There's crime and corruption. I want no more part about it to do with it. I started telling what I saw as the truth, and I reinforced it with evidence. And since then, I have become a pariah as far as the polygamists are concerned. But I don't care. I have to stand with the truth.
Tom Green had 4 young teenage brides. 4. Even though Linda Kunz was the youngest, because he became involved with her as a spiritual wife when she was 13.
Yeah, but that was not the truth.
Yeah, that wasn't true?
No, he was married to her. He had an acolyte, a guy that palled around with him by the name of Allred, and they had a falling out. And Allred met with me and told me a lot of the factual things that went on with these young girls and Tom. And according to Allred, in his house, Tom and Linda spent the night together in a bedroom by themselves at age 12. And she was
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And as far as the criminal non-support, he was there, and he said that Tom sat down with all of his girls. Tom was a bright guy. He was smart. and he figured out all the different ways that they could get welfare and food stamps and whatever they could out of the state. And they made a list, and then he sent his girls out to go ahead and apply. And if they qualified, they were responsible. He asked to borrow my 16-foot flatbed trailer. And like a dummy, I let him borrow it. And on the way out to the ranch, he stopped by to pick up some documents that I had for the Hill case. And I noticed that stacked on my trailer was just sack after sacks, and it all had welfare written on the side of it. It was all stuff that they had got from welfare to feed his family. And he trashed my trailer, by the way, on those dirt roads out there in Joab County. But here's another thing. Tom kept telling me, he says, look, I'm the paralegal, so when you get a document, I have to have the original documents because I'm the paralegal. So after he's in prison and everything, and we're going to court, and Don Red, the attorney, calls me up and says, hey, John, I need the originals of these different documents. And I says, well, you've got them. He says, no, I haven't. And I says, well, I gave them to Tom. He said that he had to have them. So Tom's got them. Well, Tom was in prison at the time. And then I find out from Aldridge that Tom wanted all these original documents because he was gonna tell the attorney, look, I have all these documents which you need to go to court on. Unless I get a certain percentage of the judgment, you're not getting these documents.
Whoa.
So here I thought that Tom Green was a good polygamist trying to expose the bad polygamist. He was every bit as bad as the rest of them, if not worse. So Don Red had a good rapport with his wives. And to get the original documents, he just left them out in the weather. They were all soaked and ruined and everything. And I had to retrace my tracks to get all these original documents, which was no easy task because years had gone by, months and years, and I couldn't obtain them all, but I did obtain enough to do it. So Don Red told me not to pat my own back, but he says, we could never have done this without you, John, and he's right. But like I say, it was the most satisfactory investigation of my lifetime. It was the topping on the cake. And it's because there were so many different facets, like the Tom Green thing, and I could tell you story after story of how matching wits, especially with John Putfin, who was a brilliant guy. It was just it was a challenge that I just couldn't back away from, and had to find to the end, and we did find the end. Out of the $6 million, I received a gift of $20,000.
That's pretty good.
Well,
that's pretty good. Of course, now on today's scale, you'd probably be paid a little higher, but look who you were working for.
But the real reward was the success, not the money. But I bought an old boat and motor, and I go fishing with my sons.
Well, that's good. The thing as a byproduct, and a wonderful byproduct, is that some of those wonderful people that believed that they were doing God's work, to find out what their leaders were like is priceless because they're cut off from the world. Basically, they're told not to listen to anyone else.
True.
Basically, they're told that they have to interpret the gospel as the priesthood tells them to interpret it, as you and I both know. Right.
I've been on several TV shows, and I was on a local hour TV show one Sunday morning here, and can't remember which station it was, and I was with a professor from the University of Utah, and he was somewhat sympathetic for the polygamist, and said that the polygamists had been driven into remote areas because of the crime, and that if we would decriminalize, they would be more apt to intermingle with mainstream society, and as a result, there would be less crime and corruption and the victims would be more apt to come forward. Well, this is not true. The actual, and I argued this, but I was laughed down. They intentionally, like the FLDS, isolate themselves, both physically and psychologically if they can, for the purpose of controlling information. And look at the FLDS and the power that Warren Jeffs had over it. It proves that exactly. It's to control information. Whoever controls information controls behavior. And that's what it's all about, is controlling information and controlling behavior. Even in AUB right now, they don't necessarily, some of the people do, but most of them don't necessarily go to the television or the news or Fox or CNN to find out what's happening in the world. They learn it from their prophet and priesthood leaders who give their interpretation of the world. They're totally dependent upon the priesthood and the AUB.
And blind obedience.
Blind obedience is what it is, yes.
Blind obedience.
And it's a shame because there's some intelligent people